I'm here. I had to get a drink of water. I didn't know I had that little time. I would have run. All right. It's good to see everybody here this evening. Greetings from Central Church Christ. They were graciously allowed me to come over here this afternoon, and I'm glad to be here. I know so many here, a lot of new faces that I don't know. I'd love to get to know you, so please, if I don't say hi to you, please say hi to me. But I appreciate the offer that was extended. It's always nice to get out from behind the pulpit that you're used to and stand in front of a group of strangers and try to make heads or tails out of a topic that you've been assigned. So I appreciate that opportunity. So let's talk about this for just a second. It's about time that I made time for family. I'm not sure which is worse, being the first person in a summer series or being the last person in a summer series. I have a feeling it's the last one because by this time it's sort of, okay, we've learned it's about time for almost everything, and we'll just kind of let this kind of go through, and we've heard all this before, and maybe you're not paying as close attention to what I've got to say, but I do think I have a couple of things that might be of use. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. It's about time that I made time for family, and I'm not a lecturer, so please, if you have anything you want to say, hey, wave at me. I don't have my glasses, so stand up, throw pencils, that's fine. Just get my attention. I'd be happy to hear what you have to say. I know the rest of the group would like to hear it as well. I'm going to read something to you. I started looking at this idea about spending time with family, and it really kind of hit home. We're in the process of packing up our house to move, and while we're packing, we find all of these things that we had forgotten that we had stuck into closets and in bookshelves and in drawers and everything like that. And we pull them all out and we start looking at them. And we found a lot of things that the girls had made as they've gotten older and involved in Lads to Leaders. They did scrapbooking. And scrapbooking is great for little girls. I imagine it might be for little boys, I don't know, but for little girls they love it because they get to decorate the pictures and they decorate the pages so cute, but what's great is they get these snapshots of themselves at a point in time. And you really forget how your children, unless you look at a picture, it's hard to conjure up what your children looked like that long ago. So we start, as they would find one, they would pull it out and we would sit down on the couch and we made time for it. And we sat there and we would look through all of these things, and the girls would talk about how they remembered this part of it and they remembered this part of it and how great it was. And it was really an enjoyable time. And when I was asked to speak on this is when we started finding all of these things. Then we looked in one of the drawers and we found a bunch of those old Super 8, I guess, High 8 or Super 8 cassettes. And I thought, okay, we don't even have the camera for this anymore. How in the world, tape. Everybody remember tape? Yeah, nobody, tape, what? At one point in time there were these little boxes and they had tape inside of them and all of these little gears. And this tape would go across and you would be able to watch pictures, moving pictures. So what we did was we couldn't find the camera that we used to record it with, so we said, okay, now what do we do? So I figured out this way of manipulating the tape and going into the computer, and we were able to pull it up, and it wasn't the best option, but it was okay. But we sat down and we were just fascinated. We watched the very moment that both of the girls were born. And of course, the girls were absolutely astonished. They'd heard stories, these tales of pregnancy and giving birth and labor and the delivery room and how they were this small and how we did this and all these things, but then they get to see them for themselves. And they're looking at these things and their jaws are dropping, and that was me? And I was like, yeah, no, this is you. This is a picture of you, what you used to be. That's not you. This is you. So they would look at it and say, oh, I was so small. I was this. I look just like Mommy. I look just like Daddy. They're just making these comments because they're just astonished. But what really got me more than anything else was not what we were seeing on the screen. It's the fact that we were taking that time as a family to connect in a way that we hadn't watched these things. I don't know why, being new parents, we filmed everything. It didn't matter what it was. We filmed it, not thinking that we would really ever look at it. It was just sort of like an archive. I don't know what it was. Years down the road, archaeologists will uncover our house and say, oh, these people, how primitive they were and all of these type of things. We didn't know what we were doing it for, but it was fantastic because we took the time as a family to look at it and connect on a way that we hadn't connected before. Now let me read this to you. Because I started thinking about all of these things and the fact that we took that time and spent together as a family. I'll read this and tell me what you think. I want to ask you your question. I'm going to ask you your opinion about this. Recent studies, this is from a CBS News report now. This is about 15 years old. A lot of this has been updated, and it's not gotten better. Just go ahead and put your minds at ease. It hasn't gotten better. Recent studies have painted a grim picture of the American working world. Longer days, less vacation time, later retirement, and all that was during the good old days of the 1990s. And the last few months have done nothing to ease those conditions, adding job insecurity to the mix as an increasing number of companies lay off workers to downsize in the slumping economy. Those lucky enough to still have a job can be expected to do more to make up for the streamlined workforce. Not only are Americans working longer hours than at any time since statistics have been kept, but now they're also working longer than anyone else in the industrialized world. So much for the lazy American. We're working harder than anybody else in the world. Part of that is to keep an economy that is still the wonder of the known world, trying to keep that economy alive. We're working harder and working longer and doing more with less. Road rage, workplace shootings, and the rising number of children placed in daycare and the increased demand on schools to provide after-school activities to occupy children whose parents are too busy have all been pointed to as evidence that Americans are overstressed and overworked. Now, like I said, this is several years old. In 1999, more than 25 million Americans, 20.5% of the total workforce, 1/5 of the workforce now, reported that they worked at least 49 hours a week. The whole thing was to get to a 40-hour week. But now here we are working 49 hours. And 11 million of those said they worked more than 59 hours a week. Let that sink in for a second. 59, almost 60 hours a week, an American worker, at least a fifth of us, that's what we do. And that's just those that they are able to keep track of. There are so many others that, they didn't ask everybody. Okay? Indications are that the bulk of those overworked people were white-collar workers who do not punch a clock and whose hours, therefore, are the most difficult to track. What do we think about this? Are we more busy or less busy than we used to be? Are we more busy or less busy? More busy? Do we have the same hours in a week that we used to have? The clock tells us, we have the same hours that we used to have. It depends on what we're doing with those hours is what makes the big difference, isn't it? We fill those hours in. Some of it is with necessity. We have to do that. When you go to work and you're told, look, you're lucky to get this job, this is what we need you to do in order for you to keep this job, what do? We do what's necessary. So we fill the hours in. Everybody gets the same number, but it depends on what we fill it in with is what makes the difference, right? So we're more busy as human beings than we have been in the times past. Now we do a little bit more. We're engaged in some different things than we used to be. Remember, ladies, if you were a homemaker back in the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even into the 60s, most of your day was taken up with caring for the house. The physical labor. A lot of the labor-saving devices and a lot of that stuff had not been, were not perfected yet. So a lot of it was just really engaged. And if you go even further back, you think about, if you grew up in that time period, think about your grandparents whose every day, every minute of the hour was filled with just doing the things that were necessary to survive. Okay? So we filled up our time in different ways than we used to. Now, I'm going to jump from this idea of the working American. Now I'm going to tell you about another group of people. Here are some more of the recent findings regarding loneliness and aging Americans. 18% of seniors live alone, while 43% report feeling lonely on a regular basis, according to a study conducted by researchers from the University of California, San Francisco. Now, lonely seniors are more likely to decline and die faster. The aforementioned study also found that people 60 years and older who reported feeling lonely saw a 45% increase in their risk for death. Isolated elders also had a 59% greater risk of mental and physical decline than their social counterparts. 1 in 7 people with Alzheimer's disease live alone, according to a recently released report from the Alzheimer's Association. Loneliness is contagious. Older adults who feel lonely are more prone to behave in ways that may cause other people not to want to be around them. 2/3, now this is interesting, because this gets into the idea of making time for family and spending time with family. 2/3 of the older adults in this study who said that they were lonely were either married or living with a partner of some kind. Now think about that. These folks that are mentioned as being lonely are lonely in their own home, married or living with someone, having somebody else in the house with them, but they still feel lonely. Let's think about that for just a second. What does all that have to do with the topic at hand? The fact of the matter is our engagement with one another has changed dramatically over the years, has it not? Would you agree with that or not agree with that? What you think it has? You think it's changed over the years, right? The way we engage with one. In what way? How is the fact that how is our engagement with each other changed in any way, shape, or form? Okay, there's less face-to-face interaction. I found this very interesting. I really did. When I was out at Camp in Agay about 6 or 7 years ago, some of the kids had just started getting cell phones. I mean, the little, and texting was huge. And it still is, but at that point, the idea of being able to send something to anybody. And I walked into the cabin one night, and everybody was sitting there doing this. Everybody's sitting on their bunk. I'm like, who are you texting? Him. And he's texting, and they're just going, and rather than speak the words out loud, I don't know if it was easier or if it was more fun. Maybe it was just the fact that this is a novelty. They were just texting one another. So the way that we interact with one another has changed dramatically. The idea of being social, now we have social networks. The idea of remember MySpace? Yeah, neither does anybody else. But MySpace, then Facebook, and then now you've got, Snapchat, you've got Instagram, you've got all of these things, these social networks. But think about how that's changed. What it's done is it's enabled us really to be in touch with people a little bit better, but I think it may have helped to deteriorate our interpersonal communication, that kind of thing. All right, what else? How else is our interaction with one another, has it changed over the years? Anybody else? How many people here before you came tonight sat down and had dinner with your family? Awesome. That's huge. That is one of the biggest concerns for those who are engaged in this kind of study and this kind of behavior study, is the idea of, does the family unit engage with itself anymore? I remember, and listen, I'm imagining nothing has really changed in this regard. When I got to be about 15 or 16, when I could drive, guess where I was? Guess where I was? I was driving. There you go. When you can drive, that's where you are. You don't have to be going anywhere. You don't have to be headed to any specific destination. I'm just in the car with the car turned on, with somebody in the seat next to me with the radio going, and we're driving. It doesn't matter where we're going. And at that point, I asked my folks after the fact, I said, what was the hardest part about me getting older? And he said, when you weren't around as much anymore. That was the hardest part about you getting older. We had faith in your ability to make decisions. We had faith in your ability to remain faithful, even if you strayed a little bit here and there. We knew that we had faith in your ability to come back. But what really got us more than anything else was the idea that you just weren't around anymore, and we didn't spend that kind of time together as a family anymore. I found that very interesting. I thought it would be, you're getting older, you're getting ready to leave, and all of this stuff. No, it was just the fact that we would come home and you would be at work, or you'd be at somebody else's house, and we didn't sit down and have dinner together as a family anymore. And I found that I was kind of surprised at that. I was gratified that they missed me. I mean, that felt good. They noticed that I wasn't there, and that felt good about that. But it really kind of surprised me that was the big problem they had with me getting older. All right, so. What does this all have to do with the topic at hand? Then we'll get into some scriptures. When I began the full-time work at Central, I determined that I wasn't going to fall into a pattern that I had seen too many preachers fall into. Against their best wishes and against their greatest desires, what happens is many times preachers take on a work and they begin working, and a lot of times they're not even asked to do this. A lot of times they're not required to do this, but they feel an obligation to engage in more and more and more, and they get they get so far involved in the work, pretty soon they're indistinguishable from their job. And what happens is, and it's sad to say, I have seen in the past too many ministers, too many preachers whose families have suffered because of their adherence to the congregation's view of what their work is. And all of a sudden you find where instead of saying, no, I can't do that, I want to spend some time with my family, it's certainly I'll take on one more work and one more role and one more job and one more obligation and one more responsibility, and that's what happens. Well, when I took on that full-time work at Central, I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to fall into that pattern. I'm going to specify times that I am not going to be available and that I'm going to spend time with my family. I was fortunate when I came aboard there. When Richard Barnes, who was the preacher there, talked to me about it, he said, this congregation is very good about giving you some time and space. They do not require you to be at everything, do everything, be involved in everything, take on any more responsibilities than is reasonable for you to do so. But not knowing that I had to determine in my own mind beforehand that I would not fall into a trap that so many preachers, and then I started thinking about it, you know what? It's not just preachers. It's everybody. It's everybody. As Christians, what is our first response? We want to help. We want to help. We want to do whatever's necessary for something to be accomplished. And what happens is oftentimes we, in our zeal to do the work, we forget where our first work really is. And our first work is at the home. It's with our families. We have to make sure that our families are the most important thing. Now understand this. Not most important to the exclusion of the church, because our families are part of that group. But we have an obligation to our families that nobody else has. We have an obligation there. And I said, I'm not going to shirk that responsibility. I'm going to make sure that my family is taken care of, because if I can't take care of my family, I can't take care of anybody else. I have to make that my number one responsibility. So, I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't have to worry. And thankfully, as of yet, I've not had to neglect anybody at home in order to take care of the work of the church. Now, it's interesting to see here that God put safeguards in place for the family. It's the first of the divine institutions. First being the family, the second being civil government, and the third being the church. So the family was at the very beginning. That's how He set up the world that we understand. At first had the framework of the family. And if God put it into place, is it something that we should honor and take care of? Yes. Very good. Yes, it's something that we're supposed to honor. Something we're supposed to take care of. There's a reason that it says that a man shall leave his father and mother and shall what? Cleave to his wife. That doesn't mean that she's a good friend. It doesn't mean that she's an acquaintance that he lives with. It means that they twain become what? One flesh. If I'm one flesh with somebody, I have an obligation to consider them, to take care of them in the way that I'm supposed to. I have to make sure that they are my number one concern, even ahead of my children. And I've seen this, have you seen this? It's become a more of a recent phenomenon where moms, more so than fathers, moms put far more effort into the children than they do into the husband. Have you seen that? Anybody here seen that? I know people who've done that. The children are of paramount importance. The husband, he gets what little affection he can and what little respect and what little interaction that he possibly can grab a hold of after the children have exhausted the mom, have taken everything they possibly can out of the mom. Dad gets the remainder, the leftovers. Now you tell me that's a functional family? That's a dysfunctional family. Anyway, but it was interesting seeing that God put safeguards into place for His children. Always has. He did so for his children, the Israelites. And He ensured that there was going to be family time that was holy and it was set apart. The Sabbath. Interesting concept, and interesting that God brought that into play the way that He did. It had a holy function. It was something that was to honor Him, but it was interesting what that Sabbath entailed. And it was when the Sabbath day came around, they weren't supposed to be away from home. They were supposed to be at home. Well, who were they at home with? Their family. What did they do with their family? Anybody know anything about the Sabbath? What transpired on the Sabbath day? What did they do? Anybody have a... Okay. All right. Sabbath day began when? Sundown of the night before. And the preparations had to be put into place so that there would be no physical work that needed to be done. Nothing. It was to be a time of quiet, a time of rest, a time of refraining from work, a time of fellowship with each other, the family unit. Mom, dad, the kids, extended family, anybody who might have lived in that household would spend their time together as a group. There would be a religious instruction. There would be time of prayers. There would be time of psalms. But that time was to be spent together as a unit, a family unit, to bring glory to God. That was what it was for. And it was so incredible the way that He designed it. I don't want anything to distract you from the task at hand. You know, nowadays, I hate to say it, but if we were doing Sabbath day now, we'll get into this in just a couple of minutes. I got to run to the mall. I got to go to the grocery store. Dad has to go into work for a couple of minutes, and then when we get home, we'll really do Sabbath then. And then, of course, a couple hours later, something else would happen. I've got to run an errand. Such and such asked me to come over. Hey, little Jenny says my friend needs me to come over, wants me to come over, so I'm going to go over there. And then all of a sudden, you would have the family just there would be no togetherness, but because God said, "I'm giving you the Sabbath day. You are to keep it holy," meaning it is sacred to you because it's sacred to me. But He gives them this time. And all of these, most of these events, most of these things, these activities occurred during a meal that was shared by the entire household. They would eat together a common meal. And as they ate, they would talk about the various elements of the meal. And they would talk about God's providing for them. They would talk about God's love and abundance towards them. They would pray over the bread and over the wine. They would light the candles. They would sing these hymns, these psalms of prayer and thanksgiving, all of these things. And it just goes to show that God had an intent for the family to be closer than anybody else. Because you know what? Even if you move into an area and there's not a local congregation, what do you still have? What do you still have? You still have the family. Can you have church with family? People have been doing it for years and years and years and years. Family is important to God. That's how He compares the church to the family. Not the family to the church. He compares the church to the family. The family came first. It is of paramount importance to Him. He does not like to see it destroyed. He doesn't like to see it torn asunder by the small things of this world. It is a holy thing to Him. It's important. So He wants it to remain intact, and He wants it to have a significance to us that many, especially in the world today, it doesn't have. The world doesn't view the family the way the church views the family. The world says, the family could be anything. It doesn't really matter what it is. Just as long as it's more than a couple people and it doesn't have to have, there has to be nothing really, no underpinning to it, no structure to it at all. It's just whatever you want to call a family, a family. Well, God begs to differ. God has something very specific in mind for a family. Well, the idea here is this. There are four reasons that we need to take time with family. And here's where we get into it. Number one reason we need to take time with family is this. We don't know how long we have with our family. Would you agree? I hope so. What does it say in James chapter 4? What does it say about ourselves? What does it say about our lives? It vanishes away, and it happens so quickly we don't even see it coming. Just a couple of minutes ago, we were talking right up front, and the idea, when we started looking at those pictures, we didn't realize that our children were getting as old as they were. I know I've got a 13-year-old, but I looked at that and I thought, in 5 years, she's gone. She may come back. Hopefully she won't come back and want to live with us for another 20 years. Come back to visit, live down the street, get an apartment somewhere. But, in 5 years, I fully see her she wants to go to Freed-Hardeman and she wants to become a veterinarian. So I fully expect to see her end up at school, and all of a sudden we get the phone call, Mom, Dad, I love him. I love him, and he loves me, and we want to get married. Is that okay? And we want to talk. I fully expect that to happen. But at that point, she no longer holds that place in our family that she once was. Now they're going to be a family of their own. I've got 2 daughters, and my biggest excitement and my biggest fear is that they're going to find some boy that's going to want to take them away from us. But I'm going to be so glad if they find that Christian boy, and he does just that. I'm going to be fine with that. It'll hurt, but it's like pulling off a Band-Aid. I'll get over it eventually. But that idea here is we don't know how long we have with our family, not just the fact that we change and we grow when we move away and things change in the family dynamic, but also the idea of this. If you remember when Jesus is speaking of the parable of the wealthy man, who said to himself, I've done well for myself. I've gained all of these things. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tear down my barns and I'm going to build bigger barns. I'm going to heap up things for myself, and then I'm going to take my ease. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. And if you remember, what was God's response to this? How did God respond to this foolish boast of this wealthy man? He said, he uses a word that was forbidden under the law. They weren't to use this word. He says, you fool. Now that idea of, that was a strong statement that God is making. He says, you fool, this night your soul will be required of you, and then who will those things belong to? Now we get into the idea of having faith in ourselves. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm getting into the idea of here is, do you think that man woke up that morning realizing that his life was going to be forfeit that evening? Did he have any idea of that? No, had no idea. First thing we need to remember is one of the first reason that we need to take time for our family, we need to make time and take time with our family, is the fact that we will not have them forever. We will not have them around forever. I was fortunate that I got to spend as much time with my grandmother before she passed in in December of last year. She was approaching 94 years old, and she had begun to slow down. We'll get 2, 3, and 4 real quick. I see these things, and I realize how fortunate I was that I spent the time with her that I was able to spend. I did not let that time go by without making the most of it, making the most of the time that we have, because we don't know how long we're going to have with our family. Number 2, we need to teach our children about God. That's why we need to spend time with our family. You know, it's all very well and good to say, well, we live together as a family, and we had children, and now we can say we're proud that we were able to accomplish this great thing. But really, if our children grow up to be of little use to God, then we can't really say that, we can't really take a great deal of pride in that. Now, I'm not saying that my point is this. We have to do what is within our power to do while it is within our power to do it. So another reason that we need to take time with our family is that we need to be able to instruct them in the ways of God. In Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 through 9, and these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit down in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. When we do that, when we teach our children, when we teach them, not just teach them, but when we teach them diligently, what's going to happen? Well, in Proverbs 22 and verse 6, everybody knows that. Train up a child when? When he's young. Why? Or how? In the ways of the Lord. Why do we do that? So that when he is old, he won't leave it. That's one of the biggest reasons we need to take time with our family. And this is just with the children. We need to take time with our family so that we have the time to instruct them in God. Let me tell you something. I would much rather be able to stand before God and say, I was not able to take them on tours of Europe. I did not send them on. I didn't send them backpacking across Europe. We didn't go to Disney World every year. We didn't take all of these great vacations and do quote unquote quality time with one another. But I can honestly say that every time I had an opportunity, I instructed them in your ways. I think you will be much pleased with that response. I think you'll be happy with that response. For one thing, I've exonerated myself. I've acquitted myself well if I can do just that. If I can teach them in the ways of the Lord. Because when they're instructed in the ways of the Lord, when they're young, when they're older, they won't leave it. We won't look at our children and say, what happened? Why did you do this? Why did you go so far away? We can honestly say, I've spent every moment that I could telling them about God. So when does that instruction begin? It begins from the minute that we bring them into the world. We begin spending time with our family so that we can train them in the ways of God. Number 3, we teach our children, we spend time with our family so that we can teach them to honor their father and mother. We could teach our children honor their father and mother. Part of the instruction of the Hebrew children was that of the absolute authority of their parents. 100%. If dad or father said this, then that was it. There was no reasoning and no backtalk. It was, this is the way that it was. It was that way from the time of the patriarchs all the way through the emergence of the nation of Israel. And we look at even the underpinnings of the law. There were 10 underpinnings of the law, were there not? 10 commandments. One of those was, honor thy father and mother. And it even goes as far as to say, honor thy father and mother, because this is a commandment that has a promise, that you'll do well if you honor your father and mother. And that idea of honoring our father and mother, remember that is an active thing. It is not a passive thing where we honor them strictly by being good. That's not what it is. Honor comes from the mouth. We express honor. We show respect. We show deference. We show reverence to our parents, not in the reverence of God, but Scripture tells us to reverence our parents. We show that. We speak that with our mouths. We have to do that. We have to tell them what they need to do. We have to tell them that while they are young and they are in our house, that they are under our control. And when they get old enough and they go and they find a husband or a wife and they move in, then it's on them. But while they're with us, we have the ultimate authority over them. But we have to train them to honor their father and mother. It doesn't just come naturally. But one of the reasons that we spend time with our children is so that we can instruct them to honor their parents. It's important. You know, when we teach them, let's see, in Ephesians 6, verse 1, I'm going to read the whole thing. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long upon the earth. But we ought to remember the last part of that. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. So when we teach them to honor their father and mother, we can avoid the issues that we mentioned earlier about the seniors. They're lonely. They don't have anybody. Even when they're in their own homes, there's a sense of loneliness. When we train them to honor their fathers and mothers, we can avoid the problems that we're seeing with our senior citizens, where they don't feel that they have anybody. Because when we train them to honor, that's not going to be a problem anymore. They'll be taken care of in the way that they deserve to be taken care of. We teach them that time spent with their parents is valuable, and they in turn will teach their own children the same important thing, and then all of a sudden we get back into a society where we're an extended family, and that extended family goes on and on and on. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It self-fulfills. Lastly, we spend time with our family, and one of the reasons that we spend time with our family is so that the world can see how we treat our families and that they will glorify God. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and verses 11 and 12, it tells us, Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. Now, fleshly lust is anything. Anything that keeps us from God is a fleshly lust. Things that we desire of this world. It's not just a sexual desire, it's anything. Anything we desire more than God. Abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Well, this is the day of visitation. This is when the Holy Spirit of God has been poured out upon all mankind. This is the day of visitation. This is when we want people to glorify God. We don't want their knee to bow after they've died in their sins. When every man's knee is going to bow, we want them to bow their knee now. When they see us treating our families and when they see us engaging with our families the way that we should engage our families, spending time with our families, in the kind of way that we should spend time with our families, they're going to look at us and say, that's a good person. I'm not sure where they get that from, but that's a man who knows how to treat his family. That's a man who runs his household. That's a mother that loves her children and her husband. That's the kind of people that's the kind of person. I may not agree with their religious beliefs, but that's a good person, and I know for a fact that they ascribe their behavior to a God. They're going to glorify God. Last question. Have you ever known a Christian who treated his church family better than he treated his physical family? I have. And I cringed every time he spoke to them. He would say the harshest and the cruelest things, and he would say that in front of the brethren. And he would act as if that was his right as a father and as a husband. I'm head of the household. I can speak to anybody I want, however I want. And, being a much younger man at the time, I felt it was not my place to speak against that. But there were men who were older and wiser and who had no qualms about speaking out against that very thing. Now, my point to this is, if he would do that in front of the brethren, would he not do that in front of the world? When he was speaking about his family or to his family in front of people who are not of the church, how would he do that? Would he change that at all? Of course not. He would continue to do that, and I know that when they saw that any claim that he had to belief in God, any claim that he had to Christianity was lessened because of his behavior towards his family. We spend our time with our family in the correct way so that God will be glorified. Patterns of behavior are important, and behavior begets behavior. And our behavior should be such that the world sees God through us and glorifies God because of an example that we set in the way that we deal with our family, the way we interact with our family, the way that we love our family. I appreciate it. I've gone a little past time. I apologize, but I thank you for your kind attention.